For more, let's bring in West Virginia Congressman Riley Moore. To go back to some reporter asking the White House spokeswoman that he was like, have you paid a tariff? I paid a tariff. Well, you know what? The chicken tax, the tariff that the United States has charged on imported light trucks since the mid-'60s single-handedly saved the American auto business, Congressman. So what's not to like about that tariff that's been in place longer than I've been alive? God help us.
Well, thank you so much for having me on. And let's talk about tariffs actually in my district. So the last administration, the Biden administration, refused to put tariffs on China and Canada, who was dumping cheap tinplate steel into the marketplace in Weirton, West Virginia. Cleveland Cliffs then had to shutter that plant because we weren't able to get tariffs. We've been able to bring that back online with some capital investment from the state, but this is exactly what the president is talking about. We're not going to be taken advantage of anymore, and we're going to put the American worker first, which, by the way, the American worker has been living in a trade war for the last 40 years. So it's time to put the American worker and the American manufacturer first and bring free trade and fair trade back to the United States.
You know, Congressman, that's great, but what's Congress going to do about this? The president can only do so much. Executive orders. Of course, the executive has a lot of responsibility on trade relations, but Congress has to back him up with legislation. What's in the committee room? What's on the table? What's there that the president can add to?
Well, look, I'm glad you asked about this. I've actually introduced the U.S. Reciprocal Trade Act, which is a really important piece of legislation. We've picked up co-sponsors as we've been moving forward past introduction. And what this bill's going to do is allow the president to be able to take into account these non-tariff barriers to trade. Now, that could be a subsidy, it could be a VAT, it could be a regulation that prohibits American goods into a marketplace where the president then can reciprocate that in the form of a tariff to lower that tariff in that country, but taking into account non-tariff trade barriers. So it's not always just tariffs that make it difficult for our companies to be able to operate in that foreign country. So this is a really important piece of legislation. We're hopeful and very excited to have it out there, and I'm hoping to see some floor action on it.
Congressman, now that the House has passed the continuing resolution to keep the government funded and open until September, the spotlight is now on the Senate to stop the government from shutting down, and not all Republicans are on board. Listen to this.
I'm not supporting the CR because it continues the Biden level of spending. It will lead to a $2 trillion deficit, and I think we need to cut spending. All the things that Doge and Musk has talked about, cutting egregious foreign aid, that's not incorporated into this.
Congressman, my question is simple and direct, or whether it's Rand Paul, Tom Massey, anyone else. What's your achievable option? The key word there is achievable, because voting no is not an achievable option.
No, and look, we just passed this bill, this CR, in a bipartisan fashion, which was strongly supported by President Trump. President Trump has requested this CR. The House has delivered. And just to be clear, this bill does cut $7 billion back from the FY24 numbers. It increases defense spending. It decreases non-defense spending. It provides a raise for our enlisted members in the United States military. $1.6 billion, biggest raise since Ronald Reagan. There are a lot of good things in this bill, and this is at the request of the president. The Doge bill, and I'm speaking as a member of the House Appropriations Committee, is going to be in the FY26. That's where we're going to see the Doge cuts in an appropriations bill. It's not going to be this bill, and the president's been very clear on that.
Right.
Congressman Riley Moore, thank you, sir.